Hi from London, it's Gareth here and it's Thoughts on Thursday, and today's topic is, are group language classes a waste of time? What I'm talking about here is your typical, evening night class after work, or maybe on a Saturday morning. On a regular basis, what we call extensive classes, rather than the intensive classes you might get, for a week full time, or going away for a month or even longer to study a language. We'll come back to those another time. In my time, I've done my share of, typical night class type study. I did French classes on the side when I was an undergraduate. Most recently in London, I've been doing beginners and intermediate Basque classes, and I also supplemented my own advanced Russian study with an advanced Russian discussion group course once a week during the course of a summer a couple of years ago. So I've sat in the group as much as many people, but generally the emphasis with my language learning is on adult independent self-study, and that's the main focus here at How to Get Fluent. And in that sort of community there is a lot of hostility towards group language classes altogether. And they get quite a rap actually, don't they? And there are a list of cons which I think we need to look at first to think about, before we look at some of the pluses. The main negatives are perhaps, first of all, that the teacher's attention is divided. If you're in a group of 4, let alone a group of 20, of course, you're just not going to get as much attention from the teacher, and you're not going to get the, the chance to speak that you would have if you had one-to-one lessons, whether in person or online, as I often do using a platform such as italki, for example. Also, of course, the teacher is the only native speaker there, so you're not mixing and matching, whereas you may have several, tandem partners. There's no flexibility either in the timing. I had to go every Tuesday night, then it changed to a Monday, which was less convenient for me, and so on to my Basque lessons. It was 2 hours with no break, which I didn't think was particularly efficient. After work, when I was exhausted, there's no flexibility of location. Then I had to trail, it took me over an hour to get home. It was really late by the time I got home. So I did this for several years, but in the end I decided not to continue. But note, I did carry on for several years. Another downer you'll hear is that, you can be held back by slower, less enthusiastic students. Now, that's all assuming that that slowest student isn't you, of course, and we've all had that experience. If it is, by the way, there's something to be said for being stretched by the other people around you. But it can certainly be frustrating if you've worked hard, if you're making progress, and you've been preparing and somebody else hasn't done their homework or doesn't actually really want to use the language. You've travelled all this extra distance, you've come in after work, and some people aren't taking it as seriously as you are. It can be pretty frustrating. You don't control the environment, you don't control the subject matter. So there's a whole slew of negatives against taking language classes. That, though, as you'd expect, is only half the story, because there are quite a few pros as well. The biggest one, of course, is probably cost. It can be a lot cheaper to take a group lesson. If you want the attention of a teacher on a 1-to-1 or even a 2-to-1, it can get pretty pricey pretty quickly. You get a weekly routine imposed. Now, that lack of flexibility, while on the one hand it's a negative, it can also be quite positive, because it does mean you have at least to put the time in on that particular day, whether you feel like it or not almost. Okay, you can bunk off, but generally there's a sort of framework set there, and that provides maybe a bit of a discipline and a thread of continuity in your language learning. If you're working otherwise with tandem partners or one-to-ones, you're very vulnerable to, teachers moving on, the partner not showing up. Whereas with a class, it's going to take place normally, and often the organisers, if the teacher's ill, will draft in a replacement teacher. So there's something to be said for having that thread running through your language learning. So the very fixedness, the very lack of flexibility can become a positive. That's true with the content too, I think. Particularly when you're a beginner, because actually, there are certain things you need to go through. So for your own good, if you like, somebody else who's experienced setting the agenda, making you, if you like, look at things that you might not particularly feel like doing, is really important at the early stages. Make sure you're covering major topics which everybody's going to need and the major structures of the language. So the fact you're following a set curriculum, particularly at the lower and intermediate stages, I would say is not such a bad thing. The group too can have its advantages. You're in a community of learners, and actually I got a bit of a social life going in Basque through being in the class. It was quite a laugh too sometimes. There were characters in there, personality clashes. No, but personalities sparking off each other? Yes, and that was good. It can depend on the chemistry, of course. I once attended a Welsh class where at the end, you know, people were at each other's throats almost. So it does depend on the chemistry, I accept that. But this whole group element and the fact you are you know, forced to study at a particular time may be useful on the one hand if you're a bit of an extrovert, or if you find motivation a bit difficult. You know, you have to go to the lesson, so you know, that's the motivation sorted for you, providing you actually turn up, I suppose. And also the slowest student argument, there can be something to be said for feeling slightly better than the average for your own motivation. And sometimes you may find that you're able to help other students, or if things are explained again to the teacher for that slowest student, you may find that actually that reinforces your own knowledge, clarifies a point, or even brings home to you that you didn't quite understand the point as well as you'd thought. At the very least, probably, being among people who are not quite as fast as you, it can be a boost to your confidence, just as if you've got the right attitude, being at the bottom of the class can be a spur and an inspiration. So my thoughts are, there really is a place for group extensive language classes in your language learning arsenal. The thing I'd say though is, don't rely on them exclusively. The number of hours you need to clock up to get good at a language is simply so much higher than you're going to get from a couple of hours a week. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of hours of practice and training that you need and experience in a language. But as part of that, going to language classes can be a great thing to do at different stages in your language learning journey. Just remember, you take responsibility for your own learning. Make sure it's not the core of what you're doing, but it's a useful bolt-on for community, for some extra input, for some extra materials, to provide a bit of a disciplined framework too. And I think you can't really go wrong with the classes. So that's been my experience. I've attended classes in the past, not doing any at the moment, but I'll be doing so, I'm sure, at points in the future. What do you think? Are you a fan of your weekly group language class? Have you been to some which have been wonderful? Have you been to others which have been a waste of time? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget, please, to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done already. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video, found it useful. It makes a real difference. And if there are topics you'd like me to cover in Thoughts on Thursday, let me know in the comments below too. There's also a link there to my Discover How to Get Fluent free 5-part video course, which you can sign up for if you haven't got it already. Thanks for watching. Vi slat.